Come on, kitty. Come on.
Einstein into the hospital Friday. Died this morning after refusing surgery, which it turned out would not have helped him recover from a ruptured artery.
As the story goes, in the early morning hours of April 18th, he muttered a couple of incomprehensible words, incomprehensible to his nurse who didn't speak German, and then in the early morning hours, he was found dead.
Now, Tom Harvey, our guy, was the chief pathologist at Princeton Hospital. His job was to do autopsies. And that night, April 18th, 1955, he's at home, sleeping, and he gets a call.
Yeah, I think the phone call came sometime before dawn, and it was Einstein's personal physician who called him to let him know that Einstein's son had given permission for an autopsy to be performed on his father.
This is Carolyn Abraham,
Science journalist, author of Possessing Genius, the story of the bizarre odyssey of Einstein's brain.
Harvey actually died in 2007, but before he did, Carolyn spent some time with him and got his take on that day.
He, gets himself ready, and he remembered it was a really nice morning. Spring was in the air, and, things were turning green, and he was walking towards what he realized was going to be a major opportunity in his professional life. He got to that hospital, and he got to his pathology lab, and someone that morning had already placed Einstein on the autopsy table.
She says he walked into the room. Einstein's laying there, flat on the table.
And
he picks up a scalpel.
And, he opened the abdomen and he saw it was full of blood from the aneurysm, so he established his cause of death.
Did a routine examination of the heart.
But then he did something that was not in the script. He removed the top of the skull,
cut a bunch of cranial nerves and arteries,
and he took the brain out.
And then he put the brain in a jar and walked out.
So he literally just stole the brain out of Einstein's skull? Just stole it?
Yeah, which is pretty gross.
Isn't that a crime?
Probably.
History has not been kind to Thomas S. Harvey.
But in Tom Harvey's estimation, and he actually put it this way in our conversations once, as that he would have felt ashamed if he didn't take it. Here was ashamed because here was this opportunity to learn something about sort of the biological underpinnings of intelligence, of genius, from arguably, certainly one of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And to not study it would have been negligent.
According to Carolyn, however misguided it might seem, Harvey says he wasn't taking the brain for himself. He was taking it for all of us, like for humanity, for science.
But
fast forward to the next day.
The family at this point, they read on the front page of the April 19th 55 New York Times, read that the brain was preserved for science. And they were flabbergasted.
That was like the first time I heard of it.
Yeah, in the paper.
Oh my God. They're like having their Cheerios, and that's how they find out?
Yep.
The family didn't know and didn't give permission.
The understanding, although you'll find none of this in the will, but the understanding was Einstein would be cremated.
and his ashes scattered in a secret location so that, quote unquote, no one could come and worship at my bones.
He was the first scientist to become a public figure, a legend in our time.
Einstein was always very uncomfortable with the attention that celebrity brought with it.
He was really afraid that people were going to start to see him as something superhuman.
The realities of 20th century science, its power, are linked with Einstein's image.
It speaks to the fact that in the 20th century, science sort of displaced religion as what people put their faith in. And he was, sort of its high priest
And so he didn't want his gravesite.
to become a shrine.
That's why he wanted to be cremated.
As he was on April 18th, but Harvey kept the brain.
So the family, when they saw that headline, do they knock on Harvey's door?
Yeah,
and
what
like
did
say,
they
what
do?
the hell?
They phoned the hospital. They phoned Princeton Hospital, and they're very upset.
And eventually, Hans Albert, Einstein's eldest son, gets on the phone with Tom Harvey. Now, we don't know exactly what they said to each other. You can probably imagine Hans Albert was upset, probably yelled at Tom Harvey. Tom Harvey apparently
Apologized for taking it without permission.
And finally, Harvey makes the pitch of his life. He says, this is a mine for all the ages. We're never going to get this opportunity again, and I pledge that I will do a scholarly study.
He made this very solemn vow to take care of this brain, to not allow it to become sort of an object of fascination.
Tom Harvey told Hans Albert he'd never let the brain become a spectacle, he'd honor Einstein's wishes, but if he could just study this brain, it might reveal something.
The secret of human genius and creativity. You can't pass it up. And the son, Hans Albert, said, yes, that you can study it.
But only as long as it's serious science, no spectacle.
So the next step that Harvey has, he's trying to craft a kind of a do-it-yourself approach to studying a famous brain.
Even though he's a doctor,
Harvey's not trained in this kind of neuropathology. He learns some, but not to the degree that a specialist would.
He spends evenings taking photographs. He weighs it. He measures it.
He hits some standard textbooks.
Different reference guides. One of the really interesting things he did during this period, he brought this artist in to paint a portrait of Einstein's brain.
Oh,
really?
When it was whole. He said he just wanted to have it, and he never did hang that painting.
really?
What
And,
an interesting thing to do.
I think partly it was because he knew what had to happen next, or in his estimation, what he was going to do next.
He's going to cut the brain into 240 sections.
And after that,
He goes across the Delaware
I love that. Like he's George Washington or something.
to the University of Pennsylvania, where there's a technician who he had worked with,
He gave her some of those chunks of brain, and she slices them really thinly.
into microscope slides, and they made 12 sets. So when the smoke clears, he's got, I'm told, 12 sets of at least 200 slides per set. And his job for the next few years is to try to take it individually to various neuropathologists who might be able to study this brain.
So Harvey sends out slides and photos and samples of Einstein's brain,
He was trying to collaborate with experts in the field.
specialist after specialist.
We don't exactly know how many photographs he gave out, how many slides, who he gave them to.
But it was a lot.
Despite all that effort, though,
There's no record of them ever getting back to him or doing anything of importance. From the few scientists I was able to contact at that time who received those pieces who were still alive, they said they didn't really know what they should be looking for, which of course was true. This is where Tom Harvey ran into the reality of, neuroscience at that time.
Everything we human beings ever do, no matter how ordinary it seems, has a complex beginning in our brain.
at that point, scientists had just started to figure out
Neuron.
what neurons do, how they communicate back and forth.
Brain alone has 10,000 million of them.
They hadn't even, scratched the surface of sort of the understanding of a normal brain, let alone trying to solve the mystery of genius in Einstein's brain.
So years and years go by, and nothing.
But no, he wouldn't give up.
And I think at this point, Harvey began to see himself as kind of a living time capsule. He was going to take this brain with him into the future when science would be equipped to study it properly.
But in the meantime, Harvey's life sort of falls apart. He has an affair, he gets divorced, and he loses his job at Princeton. And then he kind of just disappears.
Yeah, he does.
That is, until 1978, when a young reporter from New Jersey knocked on his door asking about a brain.
That was it. I had to write it. We got a great image for the cover. The cover line was "My Search for Einstein's Brain." And then one of the people who got the press release was the AP. So when the story came out, the AP ran a thing about it. And bang, it was in every newspaper in the country. Johnny Carson made a joke about the brain.
Oh, really?
What was the joke?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Something about the brain, you know, if it was really Einstein's brain, it was smart enough to get out of the yeah.
Boy,
And Harvey, people can't
spook
touch
that
this
other
stuff.
cat went around the corner like
Everyone wanted to see that. It was.
they had a
you know, lot of
conversation to
attention.
have.
The Einstein estate went bonkers.
I mean, this is exactly what they didn't want to happen.
People came calling. There were cash offers for the brain. People all over the place started to write to him
You
to
work tonight?
volunteer to become its next
Huh?
keeper, and they offered
What'd
him
you wanna do?
money.
So not only did Harvey fail to come up with any science about the brain, but he also broke that promise he made to the family.
What'd you want to do?
But
I don't know.
because of
Had
all the
many
attention,
plans.
at least on the science side, his luck kind of changed.
One place that picked up the story was Science magazine.
By the late 70s, neuroscience had picked up. For example, we figured out there were
Did you hear
opioid
about
receptors in the
Biden
brain
trying to take over our constitution?
These sensory receptors.
and had developed a treatment for Parkinson's.
No.
So scientists at this point were just slightly more equipped. And when Steve's story came
Yeah.
out,
It actually kicked off
Might hear about it during the
real
week.
research
Did you use the restroom?
into Einstein's brain that directly flowed from
Inside.
So what happens? So the first thing that happens
Huh?
is he gets a call from this
I know.
scientist named
My name is Marion Diamond.
Marion Diamond.
This still thinks it's nighttime.
Great name. She was a professor of anatomy at Berkeley.
He's still making messes. Breaker. I'll put this back on the other thing. It's just fucking snapping breakers every time I fucking turn it on. I did this last time. This seems to be like this.